Good morning, everybody. My name is Laurent Weichberger. Don referred to me as Little Bear when we were together until the last day of our work together, the last time I ever saw him, and he started calling me Big Bear. And I said, "But Don, I'm the little bear. You're the big bear." And he said, "No, you've graduated." So I'm not Little Bear anymore, I guess. Good morning. We're here to talk about Don Stevens and Mayor Baba. Today is Don's birthday. He was born in 1919 in Imlay, Nevada, and he passed away in 2011 in London, England. I like to start with this picture. When I first went to visit Don in London, he had this photo on his wall in his bedroom. You can see Don is down at the bottom next to his mother. He's the youngest of three brothers. Above him is a very, very rare picture of his father, who died when he was quite young, and then his two brothers, Earl and Wilfred. You can see if you're able to kind of see things. I took this photo when Don died. I went to his apartment for the after the funeral for the kind of reception. I knew I needed this photo for the book, for his biography. So you can see a reflection of me in the glass of the photo, taking the picture of the picture. This is one of the most famous photos of Baba with Don. This is in New York City, 1956. And you can see Baba reaching out and putting Baba's left hand on Don's right shoulder. And for me, this says so much. You could see I can see, I'll just make it personal. I can see the love flowing between them. Erich is there, and many people were there at that time with Baba, but it's just a lovely, for me, a depiction of the depths of the relationship between them. Just love this. And before I just rattle on, when I see these pictures and talk about them, if anybody wants to speak up, please don't hesitate to speak up and ask questions and share. But this is a great place to start right here.
Probably would be good if you'd raise hands to do that. I'll be watching.
Well, they can come off mute, right?
Yes. To ask a question, yes.
Yeah. So at the summer of 56, they went down from New York to Myrtle Beach. There's Elizabeth on the left of the photo. And on the far right, there's Don. And I don't know about you, but can you see the joy in the face here? Now, Baba looks like he's in work mode, personally to me. He's got his hands just, and he's got a lot going on. But the joy of just being in Baba's presence. Can you see my mouse when I move my mouse like this?
Yes.
Look at this guy back here. He's just loving life. And look at this. Somebody put this boy on their shoulders or something. I don't know what's going on, but for me, this is an incredible depiction of what it would have been like in the 50s with Baba.
There's a rare big smile on Elizabeth's face. I've never seen such a big beaming smile.
Right. Well, the Baba Center, where Baba said, "I'd never leave here. This is my home in the West," and this was all created from Elizabeth's love and all that. I mean, my God, this is the culmination. I would believe this is the culmination of so much hard work by Elizabeth and Norina and so many others, Darwin Shaw and so many others to make a home for Baba in the West. Literally, I believe they're standing outside of Baba's house right there.
It looks like it.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Do you know the lady in the pearls in the middle?
I don't. Anybody can recognize her? I don't know who that is.
The Winterfelds are next to her, Fred and Ella behind Don.
Behind Don. Okay.
Right here.
That's right Fred. Here. Ella's on the other side.
There. Yeah. And so, I have this framed and hanging in my dining room because when I see this, I mean, the proximity, just look at the proximity. This was not Baba sitting on some throne with, a rope around him and people coming one by one. He's like in a mob of love here. And look how close. I mean, Baba's fingers to Don's fingers, this is probably like 12 inches or 24 inches. This is very close. So the proximity and the love would have been extraordinary. I love this photo. Questions? Don't let me just rattle on here. I'm just trying to get us warmed up, and then I'm going to tell some stories.
That's really nice of you, Big Bear. I'm going to call you Big Bear, I guess.
Okay. So one of my favorite stories, and it's in Don's biography. By the way, if you don't have it, it's called An Almost Perfect Balance, the authorized biography of Don Stephens. I did quite a bit of research for that book, and I put this photo in there. Notice what's happening here. This is Mayor Baba at the barn in 56. Baba's sitting, and look, the barn was full, by the way. There wasn't an empty spot. But look where Baba put Don. So people didn't just sit wherever they wanted. If Don's sitting next to Baba up at the front like this was Baba doing. And if you read the book, I have a whole chapter on Baba in the barn in 56. And he set Don up to explain to those who were in the barn Baba's messages. So Baba said, Don, okay, read out the message. And Don would read some little discourse that Baba had dictated. And then Baba literally said to Don, stop. I don't understand this message. And everybody would start laughing. And Don would say, Baba doesn't understand his own message. And Baba would say, no, you explain it to me. I don't understand. So then he would have Don explain it from Don's point of view, Baba's own message back to Baba. And this was like a little bit of a entertainment, but it was also quite serious at the same time because Don took it very seriously and he started to explain how he understood the message back to Baba. And then Baba said, okay, that's good. Now I can understand. So why, besides the entertainment factor, why would this be going on in front of all these people with Baba? Because Baba was training Don to be a messenger, a teacher, a worker in his cause. And at some point, Baba explained that Don was actually one of his mandali, but that's another whole nother story. Again, at the Mayor's Spiritual Center, and we have to forgive the photographer, whoever took this picture. It's a beautiful picture. It's a little bit out of focus. People complain about that, but I love it. It just makes the whole thing a little softer. And you can see Baba sitting at the Mayor's Spiritual Center in a chair, the only one with a chair. Don, I don't know how Don could get much closer without kind of bumping Baba's arm and making Baba uncomfortable. He planted himself with Baba's permission, I'm sure, right next to Baba. He wanted to be near Baba. Now, everybody wanted to be near Baba. Here's Darwin Shaw. I believe this is Adele. I think that's Jean Shaw and others. But this is like Jesus with the disciples. Here's Erich, of course. Whoop, we don't want that. Here's Erich, of course, and others. But isn't this an extraordinary photo? Look at this. Baba's presence with those at the Mayor Spiritual Center. I don't know about you, but this reminds me of Jesus with disciples.
Yeah.
I just love it.
Baba looks so relaxed.
This is a very unusual photo. I don't remember who this is. I think it might be, well, it's definitely one of Baba's mandali. Might be, did Adi come? I don't know. I'd have to research it, but one of Baba's mandali. This is at Myrtle Beach. There's a slight double negative here. If you could see Baba's here, but Erich holding the umbrella is also Erich holding the umbrella here. It's kind of an odd photo. But if you remember back when I was taking pictures as a kid, we did get double negatives every now and then. That was a funny thing that would happen. There's Don taking pictures and films of Baba. And I don't know if you remember, Andy Muir had a 8mm film camera, little Browning 8mm film camera. And he said to Don, hey, you need to take my 8mm film camera when you go see Baba. And Don said, no, I don't even know how to use something like that. I'm not interested in that. I'm just going to see Baba. And Andy Muir said, Don, if you don't take it and take a film of Baba, we can't be friends any longer. So Don took it, and he took some of the most incredible films of Baba in India that we have. It's incredible. So this is a long story, but someday I'll tell you. This is me and Don working for Baba at the Mayor Spiritual Center. My role was to care for Don, do whatever he needed, help him in any way that he wanted. And he wanted me to be honest with him. So if he started to say or do things that weren't in alignment, you can see the alignment with Baba right here. Look at this beautiful alignment. Alignment with Baba. But if he would say or do things that weren't really part of what we know Baba had said was how things work, I would remind him, even while we were talking, I'd say, Don, hang on a second. What you're saying now isn't Baba's message. This is something you made up. And he'd say, oh, thank you. Little Bear just reminded me this is purely Donism. And he would talk like that he would be honest, that he would make things up that seemed to him to be a natural extension of what Baba had explained to us. I told him, look, you're in such a position of power that you have to let people know when it's no longer Baba, but it's your own ideas. Otherwise, it's not really fair. How are they going to know? Especially new people to Baba, they need to be able to know the difference. So I held him, to be accountable to that. But he was an extraordinary heart and an extraordinary mind, and that's where the title of the book came from. Baba said, Don has an almost perfect balance of mind and heart.
Laurent?
Huh?
I don't know if this is a good time for me to inject something along those lines.
Yeah.
I read the book changed I don't want to say, it changed me about Don. It just was like, oh boy.
In a positive way, I hope.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because you hear all this stuff and the conflicts and, and you don't know what to believe. And I read the book and it just was so honest. And so it addressed everything that I had been swirling around here. But I think I remember, tell me if I remember this right, that Don once said that Baba said I was a perfect balance. And somebody said, wait a minute, almost. Is that in the book? Or did I make it up?
Almost perfect balance.
Yeah, and I think that Don had to backtrack on that. I'm not sure.
No, they would just tease each other. You're probably talking about Neil London.
That was a joke.
He
was a joke?
He would tease Don about it.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
Baba said many things about Don. One is that he would refer to Don as my son, and other times he would refer to Don as my spiritual son. And if you go through the Baba literature, which I have, I looked everywhere I could for Baba using the phrase my son and my spiritual son, because now we have Lord Meher, which is online and you can search it, and you can search electronic documents and all that. I searched high and low. I did find other mentions of Baba using my spiritual son and my son, and I'll tell you what they are, because I think it will explain who Don was in some way. In the discourses, Baba said, and I'm paraphrasing, but you can get the actual verbatim. In the discourses, Baba said, the disciple who obeys the master 100% is the spiritual son of the master. When I read that, I thought, well, I know exactly what Baba was talking about, because Don was extraordinarily obedient. Whenever Baba would ask of Don, Don would just say, yes, Baba, and do it. Now, we'll tell some stories if you want to hear about examples of that. So that's one case. It's right there in the discourses. The disciple who obeys the master 100% is the spiritual son of the master. And then I looked up my son. Baba said, it actually in the barn, remember back here? At that time in the barn when they were together, Baba at the end of the session, and it's in the book, Baba said, he was talking about India. Baba was talking about India. and he started listing different saints in India, their names and where they were, like kind of outing these saints in a way, like saying they're genuine saints and who they are and where they are. And then after he listed them and told everybody where they are and who they are, he said, "These are my sons." He told the, I know, of course, anybody watching this after this in the future, he didn't mean literally. Baba didn't have any children. He never married. He never, as far as we know, he never even had intercourse. But he had sons. And when he said, "These are my sons," he meant spiritually. The sons that Baba indicated were his saints in India, the genuine saints. So for him to call Don my son or my spiritual son, Baba did not go around using that phrase. If you look at the literature, he didn't say, "Oh yeah, Darwin's my son. Oh yeah, Charles Haynes is my son." He didn't go around just using this phrase all the time. It was a rare thing for him to say. Now, he could have said that about Charles Haynes. I don't know. And I know that Baba had indicated with Charles, he said, "I am their father," right? But that's a different story, and that's a beautiful story. And I love Charles. We were just talking the other day. But the idea that Baba would use that phrase for Don, I think, tells you a lot about his feelings about Don. Here we are in 2007. We did a lot of work with the Los Angeles Baba Center. I love this photo. By the way, I love Baba peeking out from behind Don, and they have a similar thing going on here. It's a very incredible photo. He would usually bring out quite a bit of notes with him to talk, which was, he was an executive. He would want to show up with a jacket and tie. Seeing him at a meeting without a tie was rare. He'd like to show up in a very clean. If I would wear a shirt that wasn't ironed, he would say, "It pains me to see your shirt in that state." And I'd say, "What's wrong with my shirt?" And he'd say, "You didn't iron it." So he was very serious about Baba in the sense of showing up in a way that was befitting the avatar of the age. And I take that to heart. I really do. As you can see, when I was with him, I took that to heart here. I actually ironed my shirt. And of course, we can also be relaxed. I don't have a tie on today, but I take it seriously, and he did too. With his notes, he would have so many notes. He might get through 1 page of 5 pages of notes in a meeting, but he had so many notes. He had so much experience in life to share, life with Baba to share. Our friend Martin Cook took this gorgeous portrait of Don in India. Don had created a series of pilgrimage tours called Beads on One String. We can tell stories about that. And all that was based on something Baba asked Don to do. He said, "Hey, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea was Baba said, "Hey, take that Browning 8mm film camera you've got, and I want you to go to these certain locations and take films of the locations themselves." So this was an odd request. Don immediately went and did it. The locations were things like the Dilwara temples in Mount Abu, which is the Jain pilgrimage site, and Moinudin Chisti's tomb in Ajmer, which is an incredible Sufi pilgrimage for Indian Sufis. I mean, these were extremely important spots. And afterwards, when Don had done that work and came back to Marazad, Eric said, "Don, I don't know if you realize these spots that Baba sent you to film. These spots," and again, this is paraphrasing. Don't take this as verbatim, but the gist of it was, Eric said, "These spots were so special for Baba that when we were nearby, he would say, 'Let's go.' And they'd go up," Eric said, "they'd go up to the Dilwara temples in Mount Abu, which is extremely beautiful. If you've never been there, it's an extraordinary place. It's high altitude. There's a lake. It's scenic. It's beautifully hand-carved temples that the Jains have created." And Eric said, Baba loved the Jain temples at Dilwara so much that he would roll up in a blanket and sleep on the steps of the temple. So when I heard this story, it touched me in so many ways, but one of the ways was that Baba, as the avatar of the age, loved the love of his lovers. He said that so much. He's the slave of the love of his lovers. In this case, he loved the love of his lovers. These Jains worshipped him and loved him in a way that was visible in these temples, but also the invisible love that he was honoring by sleeping on the steps of the temples they created for him as God. I don't know about you, but for me, this is what it's all about. And in another way, Baba had given that message of beads on one string. Well, here's Baba honoring the beads on one string, not with just words of some message about beads on one string, but he's honoring it with his own body. He's going there. He's sleeping there. His presence is honoring and being honored. It's a reciprocal relationship between God and his lovers. I don't know. I'm talking too much, but you get the idea. This is the last time I ever saw Don, the last day of my last visit with Don in Los Angeles. This is at Mahmoud Ajang, Nasreen and Mahmoud Ajang's home. Mahmoud took this picture. Here's beloved Baba. Whoop. Here's beloved Baba. This is the last time I saw Don. He didn't tell me that it would be the last time. He was somewhat clairvoyant. We can talk about that, but he didn't like to give emphasis to any of his abilities. He was very, very humble, and I would say he was very conservative in that even if he heard Baba say something to him, he would rarely say that it was Baba. He would prefer to say something like, I had an intuition, or I feel, or what do you think about? And then he would tell it, but he would almost never, rarely, sometimes, but rarely indicate that it came directly from Baba. So I took this picture outside of his London apartment. We were gathered to take his body. Here you can see his hearse, inside his hearse, and there's his coffin, to his funeral. And they allowed me to speak at the funeral. They asked me to speak is a better way to say it. They asked me to be the keynote speech at the funeral. Everybody got 5 minutes, and I got 10 minutes of the speakers. And when I got up to the podium, it's a charged atmosphere, right? There was, I don't know, over 100 people. It was a giant church in England, St. James Church in London. And I got up to the podium and I just started laughing, like really laughing. And I called Bruce Milburn, one of his closest friends, up to stand with me. And I said, I have to tell you why I'm laughing. And it was kind of an awkward moment because you're not supposed to be laughing when somebody died, but I couldn't help myself. I said, I'm laughing because they gave me 10 minutes to tell you about the life of Don Stephens. I said, it's ludicrous. His life with Baba and his extraordinary experience with Baba, for Baba, and all of these stories, how could I possibly explain in 10 minutes? But then I did my best. All right, that's it for the photos. Was that fun for everybody, the photo experience? All right, I'd like to open it up to Q&A because I've done too much talking. Let's hear from everybody else. Anybody? You have to come off mute. That looks like Janet.
What?
Hello, Janet.
I don't know if any of you knew, but Don really had an idea of moving back to America after his heart attack. And I believe was a heart attack in 06 or 05, 06.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a heart attack.
Well, his
I
almost
just want to
dying.
clarify for the record, since this is being recorded, he had congestive heart failure.
Okay. His heart problems. He had I don't know if it was because he got such good treatment in the Boston area or what, but he decided that he might as well be using Social Security. He had been paying in for so long. He was going to move back to the States. And at that time, well, this is Laurent's story, but seven is very important too. And he in your book you do say that he credited seven for saving his life because
That's
um,
right. That's right.
seven's I forgot if it was grandfather or grandmother took the same medicine and he knew what was supposed to happen, blah 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 blah. But um we're old friends of seven, and we were living on the West Coast. We were in Mendocino, and when seven moved from Michigan, when he got done with school and they started, now both Seven and Laurent are fantastic computer people that can make money standing on their head. I mean, it's easier to go with them. I think I said before, the last time we did something with Don in the 90s, Don started wanting somebody to travel with him. And that was sort of how we got involved with it. A good friend of ours who was living in Atlanta then, Gary Miller, found Don at Myrtle Beach, and he was just saying, "Oh, you gotta meet this guy. This guy's fantastic." Da 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 da. Da. So Tom Hickey, my husband, and Neil Lundgren went and met Don, and they all really hit it off. So Don named them the Three Musketeers, and they did some traveling with Don on the East Coast around Chapel Hill, and I don't remember where else. But the problem and then Don, we're in Iowa. So Tom ended up going with Don to Los Angeles a couple times and then to Mexico. But Gary and Neil both had jobs and families, and Tom and I just always lived very close to the edge, so we didn't have unlimited money that we could just take off and do whatever Don wanted. And so let's see, when is that? There was the intuition course was in Myrtle Beach in 2002. I think 2001 is where you came in the picture, right? Is that, I mean, you knew him before, and I just read a video that that's changing the subject.
Thank you for all that, Janet. I started working with Don in 2002 in person when he invited me to be part of the Intuition book project, and the book became Mayor Baba's Gift of Intuition.
Right.
And at that time, I had offered to write his biography, and he said no. And then as I was traveling back home from Myrtle Beach, he wrote to me and a bunch of the spiritual companions. That's what he called people like Tom Hickey, your husband, and others. And he said that Laurent will be writing my biography, and he gave a whole letter about that. And then I moved to England in 2003 to live near him and work with him in London and Paris. So that's how that unfolded. But thank you, Janet, for that backstory. That was very helpful. Are there other questions that we could include other people? No more questions?
Laurent, I don't think you've talked too much, and I've learned things from what you first said, so I don't know what else you might want to say.
Well, I promised I would tell the story of Listen Humanity, how Listen Humanity was created. So why don't I tell that one?
Okay.
It's one of my favorite stories because, as you know, Listen Humanity as a book touched many, many hearts, and including that's how my wife's family got introduced to Mayor Baba, was through the book Listen Humanity. So this is a little bit of a lengthy story, but I think it's worth telling for sure about how the book Listen Humanity was created. And again, if I quote Baba or Don, this is me paraphrasing from the way the way Don explained to me how Baba spoke to him and what they said. But please don't take it as word for word. If you see versions of this story that Don has published, go with his version. But this is the gist of what Baba said and did with Don. You might know there was a great meeting of Western men that Baba had invited Western men to be with him in India. And that meeting became known as the 3 Incredible Weeks. And that book is available that explains that meeting. It's an extraordinary time where Baba had invited just Western men to be with him. Don had a health problem, urinary tract infection. And his doctor advised Don, saying, this is not the time for you to travel to India, Don. I'm sorry. So Don wrote to Baba saying that his doctor had advised him not to come to India at this time, and apologized for missing the meeting. And Baba wrote back, and I love Baba's response. Baba wrote back to him, "Don't worry, Don, I'll make it up to you." And when I heard that, again, I get so deeply touched by this. Here's Don not being able to do something, and Baba saying, "I'll make it up to you." And that reassured Don. Of course, he wanted to be there with all these men. But the following year, Baba wrote to Don that he was going to be having a 4 language groups. I'm putting that in quotes because that's how it was known. A 4 language groups sahavas, where each of the different languages of India would be given 1 week to be with Baba. And that would ease the confusion because there's obviously many languages in India. Off the top of my head, I know about Marathi, Gujarati, Telugu, Hindi. I mean, there's so many languages. And if you know Telugu, you may not know Hindi. So Baba was being very compassionate by giving each language group its own week with him to simplify things. And believe it or not, Baba invited Don to be at that. So he went. Baba had invited only 2 Westerners to be with him at that event, Don Stevens and Francis Brabazon. When Don arrived, he spoke to Baba, and Baba showed him a little room that Baba had created for Don for this experience. And Baba gave him a tiny little invoice of the cost for creating this little room for him. This was the kind of relationship they had. And Don gave him some money for that room that had been built for him. So Don was staying in this room. And of course, the actual experience of the Sahavas you could read because it's in Listen Humanity. But in any case, after the Sahavas, Don said he was packing up in his room, packing his suitcase. And one of the Mandali came to the door and said, "Don, Baba's calling you." And Don told us, when Baba called for you, you didn't even put another sock in your suitcase. You stopped everything and went immediately to Baba. So he stopped what he was doing, exited the room, and went outside to find Baba, who was sitting in a chair under a tree. And next to Baba was a small wooden table next to his chair. On the table was a stack of papers, and on the papers was a rock holding the papers in place. And Baba said, "Oh, Don, I know you're trying to get ready to go, I know you have to leave and you're getting ready to go, but I needed to speak with you before you departed." And of course, Don was thrilled to have any experience talking with Baba. And Don said, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you, Baba." And Baba said, "As you can see here," and he gestured towards the papers, "I brought something to talk to you about. But how did you enjoy this experience of the Sahavas? And Don said, well, Baba, it was absolutely incredible and wonderful and amazing. And I loved every moment of it. And, you know, I don't even want to go back home, but I know I have to, that kind of thing. And Baba took the rock off the papers and reached the papers out to Don and said, well, I've brought these papers, which are discourses and messages I've given out over the years that have never been published. But I feel it's the time. And would you please take them with you as you leave and turn them into a small book? And Don thought, well, he's got better people than this, than me for this kind of work. So he said, well, Baba, I know you have better writers and people who could do this better than I can, this kind of work. And Baba didn't back down. He just kept pushing it and saying, you know, Don, I would help you. So Don received the papers and said, okay, Baba. And then Baba said, you know, while you've been here at the Sahavas, I've had secretaries of mine taking down everything I've said and the circumstances as notes. And I could make that available to you, because otherwise this would be a rather small book. But if I made that available to you, you could then write about your experience of the Sahavas and use those notes from my secretary to tell about what it was like here with me during this time. Now, this was very interesting to Don because he was a creative writer anyway. He loved to write, but now he had some source material besides the discourses that Baba had handed. And he loved the idea of weaving Baba's messages from the Sahavas that the secretaries had taken down and quotes and things from the Sahavas, and then his own experience of the Sahavas and framing that up creatively. He found that even more appealing than the stack of papers. So he said, oh, that sounds interesting, Baba. Okay. And then Baba didn't stop there. He said, and you know, Don, Baba values and trusts your own point of view and your own experience. Why not have a separate section where you just get to express yourself freely? So Don said, oh, okay, Baba. And of course, as we know, Don went back. He was living at the time in San Francisco. And he said when he got back home, after he had settled from the long journey, it's a very long journey, would have been a longer journey back then. They didn't have the same types of airplanes we have. And he got back home and he said he sat on his bed and he took out those papers that Baba had given him and he started reading them. And he said the papers were in no particular order when he read them, but he saw that they had different themes or topics or subjects associated with them. So he put them in piles on his bed, organized by the topic or the theme of the message. So then at the end of that, he ended up with a number of piles. Then he said he picked up the first pile and he looked through it and he said, huh, that's interesting. And he said what happened was the way the papers were stacked in that pile, the messages flowed so naturally from one to the next that it was astonishing. And he put down the pile. Then he picked up the second pile and he looked at that and he said the same thing. The order that they had been placed after sorting them in these themes and topics. The order of the messages in the pile, if he read them through from one to the next, was so flowing and so perfect. He said, he was very interested in probability and statistics and math. He said, the probability that this is happening is so rare. Then he picked up the third pile, and then he said, wait a second. Baba said, I will help you. And he knew that the way these papers ended up in these piles was Baba. It was Baba's hand and Baba's help. So he only had to add, he said, at most a sentence or two, but sometimes just a word, to have these messages flow in such a way that they could be published in Listen Humanity. So that set of papers in those piles in that order became part 2 of Listen Humanity. The story of what it was like to be with Baba at the Sahavas in India is part 1 of Listen Humanity. And Don just freewheeling, as he would say, and just sharing his own perspective about beloved Baba, that became part 3 of Listen Humanity. So that's the story of how Listen Humanity was created. Of course, Baba got a copy of Listen Humanity, probably the first copy or second copy or something like that. And there's a letter that we have in Don's archive where Baba is raving and happy, very happy with the work of Listen Humanity. He loved it. So that's the full story, the full cycle. I'd like to open it up for questions. I don't need to be the one talking. I'd like to hear anybody ask questions, or if you have an experience of Don. Was that a good story? You're on mute, Joy.
I just got a quick phone call, so I missed part of it, but it'll be recorded. I'll go back and listen to it.
Yeah. Any other questions?
That book is so important to me. It was my first Baba book. And to have that personal experience and Baba's messages, I mean, all in one book, was fabulous. I'm so glad to hear that story. And so sorry my power went out, Laurent. I must have caused some confusion there.
No worries. Joy, you have something?
Yeah. Well, it's question is just coincidentally, Erwin Locke came to Baba after Eddie Locke told him he read Listen Humanity.
Right.
In the library when he was I don't know, he was in the library reading books, and he couldn't believe that somebody could say Listen Humanity or something, and what was that, so I just was reading about that. So that's all I had to say.
Well, I have another story about that. Don talked about the title. He said because he had worked with Baba on God Speaks, he wanted to call this book Humanity Listen. And so he told his friend about this. And his friend had a dream. And in the dream, she was reading the book, but the title was Listen Humanity instead of Humanity Listen. So he went with the dream version of the title.
Yeah, I remember that in the book, now that you mentioned it.
Yeah. Don was extraordinarily honoring of other people's intuitive experience and input and feedback. So he wasn't rigid in the sense of anything like that. In fact, he was so humble about his own intuitions that he would write to Tom Hickey, Janet's husband, and Neil and Seven and Renata and others. He would write to us with his most recent intuition in the email and say, would you please write back to me and help me true this? He had an understanding of truing, which we could talk about if you'd like, where if the idea was, if any of us read it and felt that it was veering away from Baba's message of love and truth, to please help him bring it back to the truth, the center. And, he was so close with Baba, but he had the humility to ask someone like me to help him make it more true. I was so touched by that. And rarely would I give anything other than Well, this is an incredible intuition. I love it. Very, very rarely was there anything that I could say to bring it closer to the truth, but there were from time to times a need to do that. Any other questions?
Laurent, in his
Yeah.
later years, didn't Don have kind of how should I say it? He had a sense that groups should be smallish or a certain number, and he kind of set up groups like that. Can you talk about that? What he had to say about the
Well, it's
importance
not
of?
just what you have to say. I was part of the one in London. So, yeah. So what happened was Don wanted to get married. He was bisexual. And at the time, Charmian Deuce, Ivy Deuce's daughter, wanted to get married. She wrote a lengthy letter to Baba. Charmian wrote a lengthy letter to Baba explaining about the man that she wants to marry. We have the letter in our archives here. And Baba said, when he heard the letter from Charmian read out, Baba said, "What? Why doesn't she marry Don Stevens? She has a deeper connection with Don Stevens." That story reached Don, and Don approached Charmian, who he was very close with. He was extremely close with Ivy and Charmian, even if there was, troubled waters and turmoil. And he asked Charmian to marry him. He proposed to Charmian. She said no. I think this angered Ivy Deuce, but that's a whole nother story. Sometime later, the whole story of Don asking Charmian to get married and her saying no and why Don asked, Don explained all of that to Erich in India. And Erich said, "What? You did all that just because you heard Baba say, why doesn't she marry Don? She has a deeper connection to Don." And Don said, "Yes." Erich said, "For that bravery, I will tell you a story that you've always been asking me to tell you about what it was like to be with Baba on the new life." So that made Don very happy because his bravery had won him the story that he had been waiting and waiting for Erich to tell, what it was like to live and be with Baba on the new life. So they recorded those sessions, Erich talking about the new life. Also, Mani, Mara, Goer, and others were on those recordings. That book became Tales from the New Life, an incredible book if you haven't read it. And at the end of the telling of the story, Erich said to Don, "Well, Don, now that we've had that story told and you've got a recording of it for your work, what do you think of all this, what it was like on the new life?" And Don said, "Well, Erich, I just can't imagine how you could have lived through all that hardship. It's extraordinary. And it's just an astonishing story. It's incredible." And Erich said, "Well then, Don, I've failed you." And Don said, "What? No, don't say that, Erich. Why would you say that?" And Erich said, "No, Don, I have failed you because I have failed to communicate and properly convey the glory of companionship with the Avatar. It was not a hardship for us. There was such joy in being with Baba as our companion. And I failed to communicate that to you. Well, that made a giant impression on Don, that the ending of that story with this companionship with the Avatar. And this became a bit of an obsession for Don, where he shifted his approach to Baba from Baba as the Avatar, the master, to Baba as the companion, the spiritual companion, which is exactly what Baba was asking for in the new life, to be referred to as our older brother, to be referred to as our companion, and for there to be less of an up and down hierarchy and more of a flat hierarchy of we're all here together. It's Baba with us, not Baba over us. So he started on a journey of discovering what companionship was about. And you'll notice a lot of his work has the word companion in it, companion enterprises, companion books, companion this, companion that. And he wanted everything to be focused on this shift in the new life from Baba as master to Baba as companion. And he said to us, Don said to us, in the future, humanity won't be so organized around finding spiritual masters and saints as gurus. They will form small circles of spiritual companions, maybe 10 or 12 people who love and trust one another. And he brought into it Baba's message, which is known as the last message on the alphabet board, where Baba explains in the last message on the alphabet board that people will come to realize truth through their inner links with each other, and that this linking was responsible for deepening connection with the truth. And it's an extraordinary message. If anybody has the last message on the alphabet board handy, we could read it out. But the idea is that the spiritual group, with Baba, of course, as the goal and the guide, would be Baba within us. See, the old pattern was that God is up and away and unreachable, so you need an intermediary of a master or guru or a saint or a priest or whatever, and that this was flipping the script to Baba within us, Baba with us, as us, linking to one another and bringing that truth forward as manifesting Baba in our hearts and in our lives through these connections, through these deep commitments to one another. And he was adamant that that was the way forward for humanity, spiritually. And he created groups, more than one group, groups that would live like this. And so I was invited to the one in London to be part of it. And I asked one of the members, how long have you been meeting with Don like this in this, dedicated group of spiritual companions? And he said, how long? Well, we meet every month for the last 30 years. So that level of commitment to be with your spiritual companions every month for a day for 30 years, that's not a minor commitment. It's not, well, I'm not coming this month because I want to go have ice cream with my friend. That's the day that you spend with your spiritual companions and you make it happen. And Don made it happen. He was every month, he would give us his schedule printed out on a piece of paper, his schedule, where he would be when, so that we could be there and be with him. And there was no excuses. It was a printed piece of paper, and I would cut them out and hand them out to people. So, I mean, this was a real commitment. And he felt that Baba's words, Baba's messages, and even Baba's life indicated this was the way forward. And the goal in the meeting, when we were together as spiritual companions, was to share our personal experience of life with Baba, how we experienced our life with Baba, how we related to Baba, And we would do that truing with one another. If somebody said, oh yeah, well, Baba told me I should divorce my wife and open a casino, somebody might say, yeah, that doesn't really sound like Baba. I'm exaggerating. But the idea is we would true each other, we would hear each other, we would support each other, we would love each other, we'd be honest with one another in a committed spiritual relationship. Now, at the time, of course, I was married to my first wife. I'm remarried to Vanessa, who I love so dearly. And there was no conflict of, well, you can't be in the group because you're married, or nothing like that. It was just what you did. This was part of your spiritual life. Now, was my wife invited to attend those meetings? Absolutely not. These were closed, dedicated groups. And that alone brought up a tremendous amount of resistance in the Mayor Baba community, because Mayor Baba lovers would say things like, you can't have a closed group. You can't have a meeting where people aren't invited. And Don would say, well, of course we can. Of course we can. Did people like that they weren't invited? Of course not. But so what? When you're doing work with people that you care about, you do what you need to do. If somebody's having surgery, they went into the ER and they have surgery, can the mother run in and stand next to the doctor while he's performing his surgery? No. They're going to say you need to wait outside. It's not the time and the place for you to be present. We're doing something that we need to do with your son. I appreciate you're the mother, but this isn't the time to be next to your son. In the same way, this was like spiritual surgery. What we would go through in those meetings with Don was not necessarily light or fun. It could be extremely personal, painful, even agonizing. It could be a turning point in somebody's life. It could be their relationship. It could be their inner life with Baba. It could be a job situation. It could be anything that they were navigating. And it wasn't time for tea and cookies and, just reading a quote of Baba out loud and discussing it. It was real companionship that, like the deepest kind of therapy you could ever imagine. If you ever had a therapist who was extremely helpful, times 100, because it was with Baba. Baba was so present. And remember, for myself, for Don and others, Baba is present within us. It's not Baba's present like he came into the room and left. It's Baba within us at the same time, in us, for us all, manifesting. It's an extraordinary thing. And so if you ask me how I felt about it, I was thrilled to be invited and thrilled to be there. And I'm thrilled to have the experience. And anytime somebody wants to start a group like that, you let me know. That's where it's at for me. I've been in more than that group. I've done it more than that one time. And I believe that Don is right, that will be one of the ways, not the only way, one of the ways that humanity moves forward. Elizabeth, go ahead.
So how did Don start or select the first few people in that group that stayed together for 30 years?
That's a great question, Elizabeth. Very carefully. Very carefully. And, it's a consensus. Do you know about consensus?
Yes, of course. I mean,
no democracy. It was not a democracy. It was not a majority wins. In a consensus, anybody who's not feeling aligned with that decision can block. So it was a consensus only. Diana, you have your hand up?
I do, but I think someone else has their hand up before me.
Oh, who is before you? I'm not keeping track of the how hands went up.
Marion.
Go ahead, Marion.
Oh, hi, this is Marion. I live in New York City, and I don't have a lot of questions. I'm just fascinated with what you're presenting. Some of the stories I knew and some I didn't. And so I was thinking back, because I didn't document a lot of my history of being with Baba and meetings and everything. And here in New York, we always had Mayor Baba House, and I don't remember how often Don came through, but I remember he was a very important person when he would come through and come to Mayor Baba House. But then there was a group of us who would go down to a Sufi center downtown in Soho. And I don't know if you were at those or not. When he would,
I was.
Were you there?
Because
I
I was because the sheikh, the Murshida of that Sufi group, which is not affiliated with
It's not
Sufism
right,
oriented,
right.
what I would call her a Baba liker, and she loved Don. She was a Don lover and a Baba liker. So she would come to Don's seminar work and sessions, and we would also meet at different Sufi centers. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just came back to me
Uh-oh.
so vividly, and I don't remember how many times or how I got invited or whatever. All I remember is Don when he would stand up. He wasn't hugely tall, but his presence was so, and we just all felt so at home being together. And I don't remember any agenda or whatever. It was just being together. So
Yeah.
I thank you for this opportunity today to kind of resurrect that experience. Yes,
Thank you. Yeah. Well, piggybacking on what I was sharing before, Don said naturally in those small groups, an individual would emerge to be the elder sister or the elder brother for the group, not in any way as a Murshid or a Murshida, but as a sort of natural leader of the group. And that would be helpful and also wanted by the other members. Naturally, Don played that role of elder brother in our group, but he was very clear that for any group, elder sister or elder brother would be helpful if they decided that that was what they wanted. But it wasn't a requirement by any means. Who I see hands up, but I didn't keep track of the order of the hands going up. Somebody want to go next?
Okay,
Diana.
I'll go next. I'm Diana. I love the things that I always love hearing the story of how Listen Humanity came together, and it was the first book I read of Baba and about Baba that just really it just sort of washed over me. It was so beautiful, and I love all the things that you're saying about what was in various books that Don wrote, but I'm curious to know how he discovered his love of writing, which you mentioned earlier, because his writing style is so beautiful, and his prose just sings. It's just so lovely to read. How did he become such an excellent writer?
That's a great question. Thank you, Diana. Long before Baba. So even as a child, he enjoyed writing and wrote about different things. That comes up in his biography. The two topics he loved the most before he learned about Baba was creation. He would call it creation, and animals. His dog, Denny, Denny, was his best friend for sure. The only times I ever saw Don cry was talking to me about Denny. And keep in mind, he was in his 80s when I worked with him, when I started working with him. And so his relationship with Denny changed his life, and he never forgot Denny. So he had other pets after that, of course, but Denny when he was a child, and then other animals and other aspects of creation. He was trained as a chemist, an organic chemist. He studied various other sciences, mathematics. He got hired at Chevron, which was Standard Oil of California, which became Chevron. He was hired as an organic chemist. He was one of the people who helped invent and create asphalt and other things. So he was, you talk about balance of mind and heart. His mind was extraordinarily large and sharp and clear. And his heart was similarly completely dedicated to Baba and God. And, one story is we were going around somewhere around the world doing work together. I was trying to help him with his work. And I said to him at one point, Don, why are we doing this? He said, why? were going about my Father's business. And again, that was so touching to me and so simple that he knew that his whole life was for Baba. And he had to do what he would call doing the necessary. He knew what he had to do for Baba, and he was doing it. And I should probably tell one more story that is related to that, but I'll take a couple more questions and I'll end off with a story. Joy, does your
I'm
hand?
here. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I hope you remember it's a story. I hope I don't throw anything off here. I just happened to turn to the page where Dick Anthony was foremost sociologist on the study of new religions, and it came up, what's going to happen,
Oh, yeah.
And that was
Can
page
you tell that so everybody understands it? Because that's really important.
what do you
Or did you want me to tell that?
Oh, I'd like you to tell it, but I just wanted to add something to it that I don't think I had heard before this, although I might be wrong because I can't remember when I hear things. On the third phase, Dick and Erich were talking. Dick Anthony was after the close ones who also left their bodies, inspiration and feeling of connection with the avatar would become distant. Okay, just going to read this short thing that I heard for the first time, I think. Dick told me that Erich, on hearing this, said that Baba was absolutely adamant, and you used that word too. And I want to tell you, I was fascinated by your description of the small group. It's like, wow, that's really different. But anyway, going on, that this not be allowed to happen in his advent as avatar. So Dick asked Eric how this was going to be avoided. Eric's response, his lovers should gather together in small groups to share their mystical experiences. That was really important.
I'm going to call on you, Joy, to repeat what Eric said in a second. But let me reframe that for everybody who might not have captured that clearly. Yes. But when I call on you, Joy, I want you to read out that sentence from Erich again, but not yet. Hold on. So here's what happened. Dick Anthony, Don Stevens, Erich, a lot of people at the time were deeply concerned about Baba's love and Baba's message and Baba's whole life not becoming yet another religion, and how to avoid it from becoming yet another religion. And so, yes, these conversations definitely went on with Erich. I'm sure they went on with Baba too, and we can research all that. But the gist of it was Erich being asked point blank, well, how the heck are we going to stop this from happening? So I am telling this because I think it's all input into this intuition of Don. Keep in mind, I've had many intuitive experiences, right? Like I could be working on something and really get stuck and blocked in trying to figure out a solution. Then I get to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to figure this out right now. So I'll get in my car and I'll go to Starbucks to get a latte. And, on my way to the coffee shop, I'm not even at the coffee shop, the solution is revealed, whoom, like a flash of intuition. And then I don't even want to get the coffee. I want to run back to solve the problem. But then I go get the coffee because I've got the solution, and the solution is perfect. But had I not done my best to try to solve the problem, I don't believe the intuition would have been able to flow in to fill the space of the solution. So it's like a dance of I do my best, I remain open, I ask for Baba's help, and then the help comes. So in the same way, all these people were trying to solve the problem of, well, we don't want another Baba religion. We don't want another religion in Baba's name. How do we avoid that? So this intuition from Don about small groups is perfectly aligned with what Erich said is how to avoid it. And then Joy, can you read it one more time, what Erich said?
Erich's response was how to be avoided, but the word you just used, of becoming a new religion. His lovers should gather together in small groups to share their mystical experiences. And that was such a relief to me because there's been this conflict. Do we share? Don't we share? Just in my own group in Chicago.
Well,
yeah, people have different,
Let me say this. It's hilarious to me that there's a conflict about it, first of all.
Yeah.
it perfectly accentuates why there should be a dedicated group that you just can't come and go. It's people who are dedicated, who don't have any conflict about it. If you find the mature souls who don't have any conflict about sharing their mystical experience, let the people who have a conflict about sharing it have their own meetings, and they can have films of Baba and they can discuss the discourses and all that. And if they have a conflict about sharing, they don't need to be in the meeting of dedicated souls who are trying to share about their mystical experiences and have this kind of trust. It's a trust. See, this is the thing. When you're in a committed relationship, whether it's a marriage or a spiritually committed relationship, you build trust. Otherwise, how could somebody say, well, Joy, I hear your intuition with Baba. However, let me offer this in relation to what you shared. That's a very intimate thing. It could be considered more intimate than sex, right? You're talking about your relationship with beloved God.
Mm-hmm.
And you're allowing input into your process and your dynamic relationship with beloved God, with Baba.
Yeah.
Do you want anybody just coming in there with their knives out or whatever? It's like, how can you build trust in a situation like that? So the idea that you slowly build a group of people who trust each other and have that maturity, and there's consensus that the next person coming into the group, everybody feels is trustworthy and they can work with them. For example, if I'm in a small committed circle and somebody says, well, we should bring so-and-so in, and I have a deep problem with that person for various reasons, maybe issues that nobody knows about, right? They don't know what happened or what he said or what he did. And I say, I can't have that person in this circle. Everybody would honor that because they know there's a need for safety and trust in this spiritual committed circle. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important.
Right. Now, just to finish this, afterwards, I think this was Don talking. I was struck with the term mystical, as this was kind of language. Oh, no. Okay, this is the confusing thing. I was struck with the term mystical. That's the quote. And then it's unquote, as this was the kind of language he'd never heard from or associated with Erich.
Right. I believe Daniel Stone is telling the story in that part of
Yes.
the book.
Yeah, I see his name here too.
The word art can get confusing, right? But
yes. So Daniel Prestick on the Point, who confirmed that this was the wording that Erich had used.
Yep.
And it was so nice to hear this because we had discussions about, I don't know, like I said, in my friends in my Baba group in Chicago, whether or not experiences should be shared and people have different opinions about it. And I thought, oh, this is nice. This is a good safety.
Right. And so there's a difference between having an opinion and working with people in a dedicated spiritual group of companions, right? That's different, right? So I see you, Janet, 1 second. So back to the analogy of the doctor performing surgery in an operating room. Does the doctor pause and get the opinions of the people out in the waiting room about, how he should perform his surgery? No, he's trained as a doctor. He does what he knows he needs to do. And then when it's all done, he comes out to the family and says, here's what I found, here's what I did, and here's what we're expecting in the way of recovery or whatever. It's not always time for opinions. However, if there's two doctors in the ER and one is, looking at it from one point of view and another's looking at it from another point of view, the doctor could certainly turn to the other doctor and say, well, here's my plan. What do you think? And it says, that's what I would do. So, it's a very delicate thing when we're talking about the spiritual path. Baba likened the spiritual path to a razor's edge. Walking on the razor's edge. Janet and then Elizabeth.
One thing I remember, whoops.
I don't know what happened to Janet. She's on mute.
Can you unmute, Janet?
Oh, I'm sorry. I remember Don saying when you're gathering a group, the way he did in all over Europe, where he had different groups, he said, it's not your best friends, it's who shows up. And as far as getting a dedicated group, I just got a little uncomfortable. And one thing I don't want people to understand, Laurent, saying that you can't take any criticism, because for sure when you're in a group, the sandpaper comes out, but it's with love. It's not, and if you make it too much like it's an elite group, it's not. It's a group of people with internal links that feel that they should work together. And that's tough. It's not I mean, it's a great thing. It really is a wonderful thing, but it's not, just don't get the idea that it's an exclusive club that, oh, I can't be in Laurent's group, or I'm going to be in Joy's group, or this and that. It's not like that. It's who shows up ready to work.
Thank you, Janet, for that. I saw Elizabeth's hand.
Yeah, I have a comment, but then I have a question that's kind of sensitive. Anyway, the comment is I totally understand about the groups and the trust. The thing is, when you're in a group like what you're talking about, from my limited experience, Laurent, you have the experience. Anyway, is that when you're allowing yourself to speak whatever is your deepest, darkest, or most sensitive thoughts or feelings, you have to have the trust of the other people around and know they will not turn that against you, because it is a human nature. Unfortunately, the worst part of it is, for whatever reason, past karma, sanskar, whatever, people can take what you have said about yourself and stab you in the back with it if they're not operating in love.
You're absolutely right, and Don would call that uncompanionship.
Right. So that to me is why I can see why you would close a group. I would not have understood that before today when you talked about it in the way you did. But I absolutely see it. And I also think these groups are based on something that have to do with real values, true valuation, as Baba called it. So when you're in a group like that, where you share the same values that Baba has put forward, one person can help another person get to that point of true valuation. I think they even talk about this in one of the discourses, and it's working with one or two others that you trust who can give you feedback and keep you on a path. That was my comment.
I love it, Elizabeth. I love it. I think you have another question or comment, but let me say this about what you just said. Keep in mind, please, not everybody is mature enough or prepared to enter into and to function in such a group. This is not for everybody. I'm not suggesting it's for everybody. This was put forth by Don as what he believed would be one of the ways that people would approach their relationship with Baba in the new humanity going forward.
And one of the things I am learning, and it's been painful, is that sometimes I have to take myself out of a situation where I find that's not the case. Even though I may intellectually want to be in a particular group or whatever, if I find something that is damaging, I take myself out. And I hate that, because I'm really one who loves to participate in so many things. But it's been a hard lesson to learn,
Yeah. It reminds me of a little story that I want to inject here for a second. There was a guy who used to come to Mondley Hall after Baba passed, and he would say to Erich, hey, when you were with Baba, did you ask him about blah, blah, blah? And Erich would say, no, I didn't ask that. Oh, well, then did you ask him about da, 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 da? And Erich said, no, didn't ask that. And eventually the guy got upset with Erich and said, what? You had Baba here in Mandalay Hall and you didn't ask these things? And Eric said, look, man, you have no idea what it was like. You would have shit your pants. And the guy shut up. Because the idea that Baba was there as some sort of, slot machine that you just keep pulling the lever and getting spiritual answers, or just ask him anything you want because he knows everything. He's God in human form. Erich made it crystal clear that was not the atmosphere around Baba. And Baba was hard on the Mandalay. He was not, rainbows and butterflies and pussycats. It was full on. So this whole like romanticized version of what it was like around Baba. Don told me many stories of what it was like around Baba. It could be, Don could walk in and Baba would say, "Oh, good, Don, it's good you came. We're just starting a card game. Come join us." It could be anything, right? But it could also be a very fiery Baba. There was all different aspects of Baba. Okay, what was the second point you wanted to make?
Okay, so you might have already talked about this because I didn't get here right at 11. I'm just curious. Did Don ever talk with Baba about his bisexuality?
Yes.
And how, in spiritual terms, how? I mean, I know Baba says we come in all forms, male, female, probably every manifestation along the spectrum, but especially with that whole idea of getting married and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted you to say something about that if you haven't already said anything.
I have not. This is good time. And then Ruthie, I do see your hand. You'll be next. Two stories come to mind, and I'm sure I could conjure up more if I needed to, but the two that come to mind are Don had talked to Baba about yet another woman who he wanted to marry, and Baba said to Don, "She's not the one for you." So he let go of that. And then Baba knew full well about Don's sexuality, all aspects of it. Two things that happened was Don said, Baba didn't force himself into or pry into any part of your life. This was Don's experience. I'm just telling you from what Don said. Don said, Baba waited extremely patiently to be invited into any aspect of your life. And if you did not invite him into that part of your life, he would not push himself into that or pry into that. And he said to me, so the two parts of my life that I kept away from Baba as long as I could was my finances and my sex life, until I had made such a mess of both that I had to bring them to Baba. And he said, and then when I did bring them to Baba, he didn't have any harsh words, or there was no shame, and there was no, well, gee, Don, it took you a long time to bring that up. Nothing like that. They just immediately set to work on those issues. And so the story, and it's in Don's biography, but the story that he tells in a number of places, and he asked me not to use the name of the person. But he had been with Baba in Merzad, and Baba and Don were talking about a relationship. And Baba pulled Don aside for a one-on-one and said, Don, I know your nature, Don, is to do everything and anything to make sure a relationship is successful and works. You will not let go. You will not give up. You will do everything in your power. I know that about you. He said, but I also know this fellow, and I want you to promise me something. That should this relationship start to undermine your physical health, I want you to turn your back on it and don't look back. And Don said to me that he was rather surprised that Baba said this. But of course, it was after he had invited Baba into that part of his life. And he said, Don said to me, you know, little bear, it became just like that. The relationship got worse and worse. And I had to ask myself, is this starting to undermine my physical health? And by golly, it was. It was affecting my physical health. And I started to remember the conversation with Baba where he made me promise. So I had to turn my back on the relationship. And so, you know, Baba could have said, Don, I don't want you to have any homosexual relations. I don't want you to continue to be bisexual. I want you to just get married to a nice woman and settle down. So many opportunities were there for Baba to give him any kind of orders or guidance or anything. But that's not the relationship Baba had with Don. It was really one of trust and love, of Baba trusting and loving Don to make his way in these relationships with guidance. But there was no condemnation of his bisexuality or any of his homosexual relations, period. Does that help?
Well, thank you. And you know, that's really a good way to think about any relationship. You know, how is it affecting your physical health? I mean, and of course, if your mental health is affected, your physical health is also affected. But it's interesting. I would never have thought that would be the answer. But it was
incredible story.
Really almost about preserving the wholeness of that particular human life. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah. Lucy, I want to honor your hand.
Hi, Laurent, it's so good to have you here today. It's been really wonderful so far. Everyone, of course, but thank you, Baba, for this day. Yeah, I was invited, my husband and I were invited into a group in Chapel Hill that had been meeting about 20 years. It was a very committed, small group of Baba people. And I was honored that they would trust us to be interested in working on our, on our relationship with Baba and each other. So we were part of the group, but it was wonderful. The group was wonderful. I miss it still. But the craziest thing was, over time, my husband and I would be in the car, I mean, pretty much, or maybe at breakfast that morning. And there would have been issues that had cropped up in the last 2 weeks. I think we met every two, between he and I, that we had not had enough oomph to address, or we were too afraid to address with each other, whatever it was. But it was always interesting to watch how there was this mad dash that morning to resolve whatever it was, because we knew that if we got to the group, it would come out and we'd have to do it in front of everybody. So at least if we worked on it before we got there, we could then say, by the way, we've discovered this, and we didn't look like such schleps. But that was the beauty of it. It not only did it help us in the context of this incredible embrace of souls, but it helped keep us on the straight and narrow as the rest of the time went by. So yeah,
I love that story. Beautiful story. If I could piggyback on that, Ruthie, I would like to.
Yes.
Which is that I came to Baba in 1986. I was 17 years old. Prior to that, I was extremely allergic to any organized religion. I thought most of it was hypocrisy and far from the truth. Not that there was anything wrong with Jesus or other, of the founders of faiths, but that what I was experiencing of the manifestation of that in humanity was definitely far from centered. So what I've experienced since then now almost 4 years with Baba, is that especially in America, there's a bit of a Judeo-Christian overlay by some, whereby they put Baba's picture on the wall. We have Baba's picture on the wall. That one was painted by Vanessa. She painted that beautiful Baba. But the idea that if you put Baba's picture on the wall and you've got God Speaks and Discourses next to each other on the bookshelf, you're saved. That kind of sentiment. While it may not be conscious, I think it's very dangerous that some might feel that way, that there's nothing left to be done. Now that I know about Baba, there's nothing left to be done. I certainly don't believe that's true. I think there's quite a bit to be done. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on this Zoom. But I would ask the question, what work for Baba can I still do on myself, with Baba, for Baba, in me, for others? Like the whole question of what is the work left to be done? I know many people would say, just love Baba. When I came up around Don, he'd get a bit irate because that is not what he learned with Baba, that it was just love Baba. There was a tremendous amount of work to be done, and Baba wanted it to be done. So, but the question, I think, is a personal one. That's every individual needs to ask, I believe, what is their personal work that they need to do on themselves? And then the second question is, what can I be doing for Baba? Both. In my case, my father was an alcoholic. He committed suicide. I did not have a positive early life. There were positive moments, but as a general thing, it was a bit rough. Now, decades later, I see Baba's hand in everything. What I'm getting at is, do I have work to do? Oh, you betcha. I recommend Al-Anon to people. Not everybody's interested in the 12-step group, but Al-Anon has helped me. It's helped other people I know. And then, what am I doing with Baba? How am I remembering Baba? And then on the practical level, balancing mind and heart. I have a full-time job. I'm in the tech field. So in what ways am I living up to Baba's wish? Do not shirk your responsibilities and this and that and the other thing. So it's like, it would be very easy for me to lapse into, well, I know about Baba. I've read God Speaks more than once. I'm just going to write it out and I'll be saved, right? But that kind of Judeo-Christian way of looking at life, I don't believe is best for life with Baba. It could be that somebody has that kind of vacation lifetime. There's a Baba lover who made up that story that every 7 lifetimes you get a vacation lifetime and you don't have to do anything. I don't believe any of that. I believe that I need to do my best for Baba, my inner work, my outer work, whatever that is. And then when I've truly done my best, leave the results to him. That's how I try to live. And I think Don was very much in that. And that's probably why his work resonated with me and why we did what we did together. Somebody else may say, no, just pray to Baba, the Master's Prayer, repentance prayer. Everybody has their own way. And I'm saying it's all good. Everybody's way is good. But my particular feeling is there's work to be done, and I want to be part of that. I did promise to tell a story. Should I go ahead and tell that? I know we're getting on in time. I'll tell this one last story, and then we'll see if there's last questions. Don was one of the main people of Sufism Reoriented, helped found it with Ivy Deuce, with Baba. Before that, it was Hazrat Inayat Khan Sufism. Don was a Sufi in the Inayat Khan Chishti order before learning about Baba. So Don's relationship with Sufism predates his relationship with Meher Baba. When Ivy Deuce first encountered the hippies in California, she called Don. She had absolutely no idea what to do with these hippies. Don met them for the first time and said he really was astonished. He didn't even have any way to think because he was just astonished by their appearance. And after they started speaking and he stopped, oogling their appearance, he said, wow, these are actually very deep, soulful, heartfelt thinking people. And he had to take his attention away from their appearance and put it on the content. And he was deeply impressed by their their hearts and their minds. And he said that, these were sincere seekers for the truth. So that's a whole long story. There's a whole chapter about it in the biography. But at some point, he introduced them to Meher Baba's discourses. At the time, there was a 5-volume set of discourses that Deshmukh had created for Baba. That was the discourses, 5 little blue volumes. So when Baba and Don were together in India, Baba would say, how is it going in California? And Don said, well, Baba, there's this new group known as hippies, and they've become interested in you. And Don said Baba was extremely interested in the hippies and asking lots of questions. And part of it was, well, Baba, we're reading now with the hippies, we're reading your discourses, from Deshmukh, the books from Deshmukh. And of course, they're wonderful discourses and they love them. Don would say they really cotton on to them, things like that. This old-fashioned slang. And Baba was extremely interested in everything to do with hippies. And so Don said, they love it, Baba. However, to be honest, I know you want me to be honest, we would sometimes have to reread a sentence or a paragraph multiple times because, the way Deshmukh writes is more of an Indian style of English than what we're used to in America. So I would suggest, Baba, that you have some of your, best writers who are your lovers to perhaps edit the discourses for a more Western audience of Americans and, people in England because of that style, of that Indian English style that seems to be a little bit difficult. But of course, they love your discourses. So Baba said, oh, that's actually a very good idea, Don. I want you to do that. That was the first time Don fell in that trap of making a suggestion and then getting the work himself. So Don did start, and it was quite a lengthy process. You can imagine taking the discourses 5 volumes and re-editing them for hippies, essentially, but for the West, right? And so he did. He worked on it. And he said every time he would come back to India in that process, Bob would say, how is that editing of the discourses coming along? And Don would say, well, Baba, it's quite a bit of work. We're making progress. It's coming along. But he said literally every time he would see Baba in India, Baba would say, you must be just about finished by now with editing of the discourses. It was always a little poking of the bear, And then Don at some point said, well, we're almost done, Baba, but I don't know what good it'll do. Don would frequently find himself in these situations where he would say something and then go, oh, now what's going to happen now? So Baba looked at him and said, what do you mean by that, Don? And of course, Don had made a vow of honesty with Baba. I don't know if you know about the vows of honesty, but he had made 2 vows of honesty with Baba, one in his personal life and one in his business life. And so he knew, he told me this story more than once. He said he knew now he was halfway into this situation, he had to follow through. And so in the name of honesty, he said, well, Baba, what I mean is so many of the most sincere spiritual seekers and lovers of God that I know in the world say that it's not through words that we become closer to the truth. And Baba looked at Don and said, do they say that about Baba's words, Don? And Don said, yes, Baba. So Don said that then something happened which had never happened before. Don said Baba turned away from Don and started a conversation with Erich, which was lengthy. And Don was not part of the conversation. It was like the energy shifted, and Erich and Baba went into this dialogue, which took much longer than Don expected. And he said eventually, after some time, Baba turned back toward Don, and Erich said, "Well, Don, you, you've brought up something quite important to Baba, and sorry it's taken us so long to get to this, but it was actually difficult for me even to understand what Baba wanted to convey to you here." Of course, at this point, Baba was no longer using the alphabet board. This was now in the period where Baba was using hand gestures. And so Erich said, I'm not sure I have it 100%, but I'll tell you what Baba wants me to tell you. And I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm not saying it, but if I'm not correct here. But the gist of what Baba wants me to tell you right now is that you have no idea about the work that you're doing and that Baba's doing through these words, because he has attached to his own words something like an atomic bomb of spiritual energy, so that when the aspirant works with his words, they will receive some portion of that spiritual energy, which will be immensely helpful to them on their spiritual ongoing. And then Don said, Baba pointed at him like this. And then Erich said, and Baba says it is your responsibility, Don, to explain what Baba has explained to you today about his words to his lovers. So what's extraordinary, there's so many extraordinary things about this story, but one is that Don actually stepped into this. I mean, he stepped right into this hole in a way that was kind of like he just blurted it out. I don't know what good it's going to do. But as a result, we have such a beautiful response from Baba, so that the mistake he made, or whether it was a mistake or not, the way he expressed himself about, I don't know what's good it's going to do, the response is like 100-fold of beauty and glory for me of the reality of what Baba's doing. And he was working with Don to accomplish that, so that Don spent the rest of his life from that point explaining to people about the importance of Baba's words and working with Baba's words. Okay, I see Elizabeth and Joy's hands up. Go ahead.
Who do you want?
on mute.
Oh, okay, I'll go. So I had heard that, but I had heard it only about the words "and God speaks." So
No.
you're okay. I wanted you to clarify that. Okay, thank you. Because I've heard people say, and when we were reading God Speaks, and I've read it, I don't know how many times I've read it at this point, but we would talk about the fact that those words are like a time, and I can attest, the more I read it, the more I understood that each word and how they're put in a sentence was critically important, and you could misread it if you weren't careful. And we had to read passages 5 to 10 times sometimes to really understand, or get to the place where we could understand to the level of our ability to understand that particular passage.
I'll just say it once and for all. Baba did not indicate which books or which words had the atom bombs and which didn't, but it was certainly not limited to God Speaks. And then Joy, and then Richard, I saw your hand go up.
Actually, I think we could end it right here. I just loved what just happened here about the word. This could be a yes or no real quick. Do you have any comments about the relationship between Bao and Don?
Oh, sure. Baba set them up to dance the dance that they danced. I created a whole book about it called Mandali Email.
Okay.
If you haven't read the book Mandali Email, please
Yeah.
read that, and then I will follow up with you individually.
Okay. Thank you.
There's much more to that story, and there's a bit of a whodunit around Judas and all that. But we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah. There's been gossip again where things have not been clarified, and I'm glad for you to say that.
Sure.
I'd like to
Richard?
hear about that as well, because I was really close to Balji.
Okay, another time we'll do that.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Richard?
Yeah, I'm sorry I came in late.
No worries. No worries.
Anyway, yeah, I think when you were speaking of earlier, 30 minutes ago, of the group context, all that makes a great deal of sense to me. But I know there's a few comments about that I have thoughts in my mind. One is, I think part of a group is becoming more aware of yourself through the witnessing of other people, and then you can try to become more conscious of your sanskaras, unconscious, subconscious, whatever. And I know in my history, I don't know if you ever heard of it, but I went to, at one point in my life, I went to hundreds of Codependence Anonymous, where you
Sure.
simply listen, you don't interrupt, you don't comment, and you learn a first name. So it was fascinating for me, and I actually loved it. People telling their own version of who they were and what their story was.
Yeah.
But the other part of that is that on a much deeper level, I think what I get from what you're saying and in the gist of this is and for me, this hits the mark, as Dr. Kenmore would have said, but it is that you're on a journey to Baba is managing each of our sanskaric consciousness with total reality consciousness, right? So we're moving to become more aware of ourselves in terms of the avatar consciousness. And I think what that means is when you're in a small group, as long as you're focused on Baba as the very core and center of whatever that is, then Baba's involved in working on each member and together as a group. I think it's profound. I don't even know if I would really be capable, but I would have to rely on every member of that group. I would have to be able to rely on them. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing all that. Beautiful. I didn't hear a question in it, so I'll just honor it for what it was.
I for some reason have this mental thing of formulating statements or observances, sort of like that. But
Beautiful.
I was always really curious about Don, and I, for some reason, the second book I ever read was Listen Humanity, I think, or maybe even the first. And I read it all the way through, and intellectually, it was probably the beginning for me of thinking of, because there's discourses in there, but the story that Don was telling along that path, I mean,
Yeah, we talked about that when you weren't here.
bang, I'm sorry. And then God Speaks, getting back to the other comment, for me, everything, especially God Speaks, and I think even in Infinite Intelligence for me in this, but God Speaks, I need to read it again, but every word, and like the syntax, I think that Joy was talking about, you really, as you grasp it, and I think that's why Baba told Robert Dreyfus to read it until it sings in your veins. But as you grasp it, there is something, he's actually impregnating your own awareness, with this stuff. It's a little
Great way of
different.
saying it.
Anyway,
It's a great way.
Lauren, thank you, because I love this stuff.
Thank you for participating. Appreciate your presence.
Thank you, Lauren, very much.
Last thoughts and feelings before we wrap it up. Sorry, I rambled on a bit. I know it's been a long session.
I just want to say thank you, Laurent. Every time you talk, you bring so many wonderful insights, and I just really appreciate it. And it's so insightful I mean, I could just listen to you forever, I think, kind of like Charles. But I just, really, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate your presence.
Yeah, sorry about no video, but oh well.
It's okay. It's all good.
You were the perfect person, Laurent, to inherit Don's whatever. He's, you know, you're a great one to communicate who and what he was to all of us. It's been wonderful. It always is.
Thank
Love
you. Thank you. Richard, did your hand go up again, Richard?
Yes, I have one question for you, and that is on your first trip to Baba's tomb, how did that impact you? Or how did you feel about it?
Oh boy, I wasn't expecting that.
I know.
I'll tell you this much. This isn't really the time to answer that fully because we're at the end of a session, but I'll say this much. I experienced Baba's divinity when I came to Baba in New York City and my first trip to the Meher Spiritual Center. That was about totally accepting and surrendering to Baba's divinity. When I went to the Samadhi for the first time, I was 19 years old, and I let everybody go to Marazad, and I stayed at Mehrabad to be with Baba in the Samadhi alone for hours. I experienced Baba's humanity. And for me, my whole life with Baba has been about integrating his divinity and his humanity in my journey back to him in a way that's, you know, perfectly human, the love that's perfectly human. And I'm not there yet, but I'm not giving up. Thank you, everybody.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you.
Otar, Mayor Baba,
Baba, TJ.
Otar, Mayor Baba,
Baba,
TJ.
TJ.
Otar,
Baba,
Baba,
Baba, Ki Jai.
TJ. J Baba.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Jay Baba.
Yay, Baba.